Hi, my name is Dale Maley. In this short video, I'd like to tell you about a recent project I completed about building a low-cost table using common pine. A little background on this project. The table needs to have a 12-inch by 36-inch top, and it needs to be 32 inches tall. I'm going to use it in a museum display room. I've built several tables of similar designs, I just have to modify the size. Now here's a concept drawing of this particular project and what I'm going to use the table for. You can see the table sitting there. I have 3D printed plastic models of some ornamental iron blacksmithing work, and I want to display those on top of the table as shown. Now the finish I'm going to use on this is just shellac, because I already have a display case and a mock fireplace I made in the same room, so I want all three pieces of furniture to match. You're free to use whatever kind of finish you want, and in the past, as an alternate, I've used a thick fruitwood oil stain and polyurethane, and I'll explain. Now here's a previous table I made, and I'll describe the fruitwood oil stain process. You apply a fruitwood oil stain with a brush, but instead of wiping it all off with a rag as you usually do with oil stain, you either don't wipe it at all or just wipe it lightly. And it takes a while for it to dry. Then you put on a first coat of polyurethane, sand it 10 to 220 grit after it dries, put a second coat of poly, and if you want it really smooth you could sand it again and put a third coat of poly. And it gives a nice finish. Pine's very difficult to stain, so this method gives you a pretty good finish. But in this project I'm just going to use straight and simple shellac. Now you can use the methods shown in this video to make a table about any size or height that you want. And all it requires is some common 1x4 pine, which actually measures 3/4 of an inch by 3.5 inch, and some 2x4s, which actually measure 1.5 by 3.5 inches. But the only other part you need besides the finish would be the Rockler steel tabletop fasteners. We'll show those in a minute. On this project, all my mortise and tenon joints use 1/4 inch thick tenons. The mortises typically are about 5/8 deep to allow 1/2 inch of engagement with tenons to the mortise. The mortises on the two bottom rails, they can be a little more stout because they're thicker. They're 1.5 by 1.5 legs. So on those I went 1.1/8 deep to allow about 1 inch engagement there. Now in this exploded view, you can see the two vertical slats on the ends. They're 1/4 inch thick by 1.25 inch wide, and I designed those so they can engage about 1/2 inch into the horizontal crossbars. Down the bottom, this is a case where I'm using the longer 1 inch tenons to engage into the 1.5 by 1.5 square legs. That gives you more strength, and these legs are thicker so you can have some more engagement. Now if you want to build a table with a wider top, if it gets wider you may want to look at adding some more vertical slats. I'm just using 2 for a tabletop that's about 12 inches deep. The lower shelf in this case is 5 inches wide, and if you make a wider tabletop you might want to increase the lower shelf width also. One nice thing about the woodworking hobby, you can use many different combinations of tools and processes and achieve the same end result. But in my case, here's the power tools I used. I'm using a table saw, then I'm using a router table, and that's primarily to round the edges over of the tabletop. I'm using a mortising machine for the mortises and for the tenons. They also make mortising attachments for drill presses, or you could cut the mortises by hand using a 1/4 inch wide chisel. I'm using a drill press, and I have a 12 inch wide planer, and I'm using that when I glue up the boards. I glue up 1x4s to make the top, and then I run it through the planer to smooth out the joints between the boards. You could also use a belt sander to do the same thing. Now here's a photo where I glued up and clamped what's going to become the tabletop. When I join the boards together, I don't have a joiner. I use what I call the poor man's method on the table saw. And all that is at the joints of the boards, run one of them through the right side of the blade, and then the other board run it through the left side of the blade. Any angle error in the blade cancels out, and you basically get a perfect joint. I use Titebond glue to glue these up, and then I make the blank a little oversized, both in the width and the length, so after they're all done, glued and clamped, you can go back and finish saw them to the final size you want. Now, to avoid making mistakes where you actually put the mortises in the four legs, I've learned from past mistakes, go ahead and just use blue masking tape and label the legs, where they go and whether they're the front or the back. This helps avoid errors, and after you've got it assembled, you can simply remove the tape. It doesn't bother any of the finishes you might choose. On this project, there's quite a few mortises to lay out on the different parts. And to make that a lot faster, I just take a piece of Luan, which is 3/16 inch thick plywood. I mark that one time, and then I take it to a scroll saw and scroll saw out the opening. Then you can very quickly mark out where the tenons need to go on all the pieces. Here's a photo of my Delta mortising machine. I bought it used several years ago, and it works great for these type of projects. Here's a close-up of the work area of the mortise machine, and you can see the 1/4 inch square chisel that I used on this project. I made this drawing in SketchUp, and I print it out and take it to my shop. Then it shows the dimensions I need to use to make the mortises in the bottom cross piece down there that holds the two vertical spindles. Here's a picture of my tenon making fixture that I use on my table saw. Now in this project, I just left my 1/8 inch thick blade in, my regular blade. I could take it out and install a dado set and maybe make these faster, but for the small number I need, I chose just to leave the regular blade in. Here's a close-up photo of the tenon making jig on the table saw, and you can see one of the vertical pieces sitting there clamped up with the shape of the tenon on the top. There's a common saying in woodworking that a woodworker can never have too many clamps. This shows how I glued and clamped up the basic table frame itself. The top will be attached separately, and we'll see that in a second. In this photo, you can see the kind of black colored steel tabletop fasteners. I happen to buy these from Rockler, but there's other places that sell them. The important thing is, don't forget to saw the grooves in the pieces that tabletop fasteners slide into. Usually I get so excited I want to glue and clamp up the frame, and I forget to put the grooves in. You can do it like on a router table afterwards, but it's a lot more difficult to do. So remember to saw those grooves in that you need for the tabletop fasteners before you assemble the table frame. So the table is basically done, and it's ready for one coat of amber shellac. I buy that from Ace Hardware. They sell a clear and an amber version. On pine, I've chosen to use the amber version. It gives a little bit of a yellow color. Now here's a photo of the finished table. I've even put on the rack that I'm going to put one of them along with a 3D plastic model on one end. I'll actually have 4 racks and 4 display items. But anyway, this is what the finished table looks like. I've used the same concept to make 3 or 4 different tables. Here's 2 of them I made in the past. A tall and skinny one on the left and a lower, much bigger one on the right. So you can modify these techniques to fit any type of size or height table that you need to build. Some closing thoughts on this project. I find these projects very fun to do. It's relatively inexpensive since you're using just common pine. The end result tables are actually very lightweight but still very strong. And the basic designs here can be adapted for any size of table or table height. So in summary, this video explains how to make a nice looking low-cost table just using common pine. Hopefully this video gives you some ideas and helps you on your projects. I hope you enjoyed the video, and please subscribe. Thank you.